You're listening to the One Step Deeper podcast with your host, Jimmy Moore and Brittany Davis. OneStepDeeperPodcast.com.
So, we missed last week. A lot of people were like, "Where's Brittany? You're cool and all, Jimmy, but where's Brittany?" I was like, "Well, we both kind of needed a break last week. We both had stuff going on in our lives, and so sometimes that happens. But I think what happened was people got to taste our podcast that haven't had it before, so that was fun."
Yeah, I think last week was definitely needed, like that break and that rest, and it really gave way to what we're going to talk about today. I think last week was such a turning point in both of our lives and something big that happened. It highlighted this area that we needed to talk about, so much so that we pushed all of the other ones that we planned to talk about to put this one. Yeah,
we bumped this up in the schedule because it is something that we both have gone through, and it's kind of the crux of this show. You can't go one step deeper unless you do what we're about to talk about here today. So why don't we stop being coy about it? You want to introduce the show?
Yeah, so welcome to episode 18. We're going to talk about the strength and power of vulnerability, something that Jimmy and I both know very well, perhaps not in our younger years, but the closer that we've gotten as friends and the more that we dive into this area of going one step deeper, just the vulnerability aspect, you just have to go there. It's required to go one step deeper.
Yes. So guys, go visit our website, onestepdeeperpodcast.com. That's the official website. You can check us out. We're both a video show and an audio podcast. So wherever you're consuming the show today, thank you for being here. You can go check us out over on YouTube. Just type in a keyword, One Step Deeper. You'll find the show. We still debut them at 4 p.m. Eastern time on Sundays, so go check it out. And then on Mondays, it airs wherever you listen to podcasts and all the usual suspects of Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, Alexa, all the above. Go check it out. And then, come hang out with us on the socials. We have an Instagram page, One Step Deeper Podcast. We also have a Facebook page, One Step Deeper Podcast Community. And that's all the ways you can reach out to us. And please engage. We would love to hear from you. We don't do this show. Well, we do this show for you and me because you and I have lots of conversations. In fact, I think we've talked every single day this week. That's a rarity. Usually it's every few days, but every day this week we've had some stuff. And so it's been good to do that. But we love coming here corporately on this show to talk to you guys. But vulnerability, it's so hard to get into this topic, especially for dudes. Like, guys don't want to go there. Girls have a little bit easier time, I guess stereotypically an easier time of being vulnerable because you're allowed to have feelings. But from my perspective, I was always hammered of just man up, you're being a wuss. If you show any feeling and any kind of perceived weakness, which is what a lot of people in the culture think of when they hear the word vulnerability.
Yeah, vulnerability has become almost a cuss word even, and that people equivalate vulnerability with weakness. And it's just so polar opposite. Like, if you really think about being vulnerable, like, it is the again, I just say it again, it's the complete opposite of showing weakness, because in order to be vulnerable, you have to literally open yourself up. I listen to Brené Brown all the time. She's one of mine that I listen to, and she talks about vulnerability is her thing. If you want to know more, Brené Brown is the way to go. And she was talking about, she was doing a conference, and there was someone who was going to be doing sign language, and there were two different ways to show vulnerability. One is you sign like you're falling down, and that was one sign. She's like, no, it's not really what I'm talking about, because that shows weakness. And they were like, well, the only other one is this, where you open yourself up. And she's like,
things that I thought was really interesting. I gave a talk. It's probably a couple years now, and it was being translated by people doing American Sign Language, and they came up before the talk started and they said, are there any words that you're going to use a lot in your talk that we should know about that might be different? And I said, well, I use the word vulnerability a lot. And there were two of them, and they kind of looked at each other and they said, oh, we do this for vulnerability. And I said, what does that mean? They said it means weak in the knees. And I'm like, wow, that's not how I talk about vulnerability. And she said, well, there's only one other sign for vulnerability. And I said, what is it? And she said, and I said, oh, that's what I'm talking about.
Because that's what vulnerability is. It's just completely opening yourself up. And when you're vulnerable, you are opening yourself up to fear and hurt and pain and all of those things. But at the same time, if you close that vulnerability door and you're closing all the pain and all the hurt and all of that, you're also closing all the good times. You're also closing all of that, because you can't selectively numb the bad without numbing the good. You can't selectively numb emotions and feelings.
And there's the rub. I think that's where people are hesitant about opening themselves up. All they do is, this is going to be harmful, this is going to hurt. And I almost see it as an emotional surgery when you're vulnerable. Because when you go to surgery, does it hurt? Let me ask the girl who got cut open last year. Does it hurt when you get cut open, Brittany? Yeah, just a little. Not enough Vicodin in the world to get that pain to go away sometimes. And it lingers even. And so people think, okay, well, I'm cutting myself open emotionally. It's going to hurt, but they don't realize the healing that comes from it, the release that comes from it. What else are you doing when that hurt is happening? And it's a perceived hurt. It's not always hurt. When you become vulnerable, you think you're going to hurt, but sometimes you go, whoa, I opened the floodgates of something I didn't know was going to happen.
Something that has happened with me with becoming more vulnerable and opening that up, I've become more vulnerable with myself to uncover all of my patterns, uncover my unhealthy things. And as I've done that, I have grown into, in my opinion, this might seem a little lofty. I couldn't think of the word there I was looking for, but I like who I am. I really like who I am right now. I like this person that I've become because I am so vulnerable. It really started with my relationship with my husband several years ago, because I was closed off. I shut everybody out. In my teenage years, I didn't let anybody in. I was so hurt for so long and so vulnerable with the people that continue to hurt me and hurt me and hurt me. I closed everybody off, everybody. And then I met my husband, who had done the same thing. He had been hurt and hurt and hurt and hurt in his whole life. But he swore he would never put up those walls to not let somebody in. And it just blew my mind. He blew my mind, having this approach to life that I'm still going to be me. I'm still going to be vulnerable. I'm still going to put myself out there. And I got a cute little story I was thinking about as we were talking about vulnerability. I met my husband. I knew him previously, but I was 18 and we were young, and we went on our first date, and then our second date and our third date 3 days in a row. And on our third date, I told him I loved him. It was an accident. I didn't mean to. He was hugging me, and he had just been so raw and open and telling me his story and his life and about his past relationships and his family. And he was telling me all of these dynamics, being 100% vulnerable with me. And I had never experienced that in my life. Never felt that level of someone opening up to me. And he went to hug me, and I just laid my head on him, and I was like, I love you. And it just blurted out, because vulnerability demands vulnerability.
Yes. And see, that's the thing. Like, he was wanting you to say it at that moment because he was thinking the same thing, but he was kind of seeing if you would go there with him. You showed him in that moment. It's a beautiful story, by the way. I still don't believe, and you're still together a decade plus later, still happily married and happy in every way. You got the 3 kids and the beautiful house, and it's just, yeah, your life's going really good. Most people probably told you at the time, you're crazy, you're too young, it was too fast, and all the things, but vulnerability begets vulnerability, and you kind of have to have that on every side, or this doesn't work. Like, somebody can be vulnerable, and you saw it with the family, that you were being vulnerable with them, but they weren't returning it. And so it made you put up walls. Yeah. Thank God for Wild Man in your life, because you still have all these walls high to the sky, and just get out of my way.
Yeah. He demanded that, like his presence around me, just, I craved that. And so that was really the shift of me words. beginning to become this version of me. And so I go by Brittany. That's what I go by in everyday life. But my Instagram handle is Becoming Brittany Lee. And it's almost as like my name is Brittany Lee Davis. And Becoming Brittany Lee is like this, I want to get there. Like Brittany Lee is like the healed and whole version of myself. And I don't know if I'll ever be there, but it's not a there I'm chasing. It's just becoming this version of myself, owning my story, showing up, being vulnerable here with the people listening, and vulnerable with my friends, and vulnerable in all of these relationships. And along this way, as I'm becoming more and more vulnerable and opening myself up, I'm becoming this version of myself that I want. I want people to know my story and hear my story, and I want them to feel that vulnerability that I give, so much so that they want to share their story. They want to pour out.
Well, that's the thing about vulnerability. It allows other people and gives them permission to be vulnerable back. Because when they see you've got walls down and you're like saying, and you and I have experienced this many times. I've shared things with you I don't share with everybody. And I'm like, okay, how's this going to go? Like early on. Now I'm like, blah. And you're like, yeah, come on, bring it. And then you do it back to me. And it's so fun. Because when you have somebody willing to go there and who you know has your best interests in mind, but there's this trust, like with you and Wildman, the trust was quick. You knew, he knew. And it was pretty quick with us as friends, but it's rare. You don't find many people willing to open themselves up to the kind of relationship you and I have, for example. It's just, people don't want to go there. They want to hear you be weak, and in that perceived to be stronger than you. Well, look at the crap they're going through in their life. Look how wonderful my life is. Meanwhile, they're falling apart, but they're not willing to share. And they only knew, had they shared, you could help each other and grow from both of you being vulnerable.
Yes. And as a person who embraces vulnerability, I see those types of people with big red flags. They have big red flags, and I just see big X's, and I don't mind being around them or in their life. But if they're, and people don't have to tell me their whole life story. Okay. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm begging. But there's this level of vulnerability and just being open to listen to me, to listen to my thoughts and my beliefs and my feelings, and just be opening to listen, even if they're not willing to believe or feel the same thing that I do. They're just open. And that's something that I aim very high for this. So if someone comes at me in a conversation and like, no, this is wrong, you're terrible, you're horrible, and this might be a real life situation that I'm speaking from, I get attacked. And I refuse to meet that attack. I refuse. I'm like, I'm open for a conversation. Let's have a conversation about this. Let's meet on a common ground. I would love to talk to you, because I stay in this open, vulnerable place where I am just willing to learn. I am willing to look at your life, and if we disagree, I'm willing to look at why we disagree, what God is here, where your beliefs came from. I'm willing to look at all sides, not just my own. I'm willing to open myself up to so much more. And in that, my relationship has gone, every time you and I get into something, I'm 28, you're 48, 49, somewhere around there, late 20s, late 40s, female, male, a lot of differences that we have. We're going to have different things come up, but every time we've had these come up, you set a boundary or I set a boundary. We are open and vulnerable when we set said boundary. We're not used to that, and each other, we meet there, we are open to that, and we respect that boundary, and then our relationship grows because we were vulnerable in this one moment of pain and hurt to grow.
What's amazing to me is how people can be friends or even have some kind of a relationship with anybody of any kind, whether it's love, whether it's family, coworker, whatever. How do you have a relationship that's more than weather, sports, politics, and nothing else? Like just this surface value stuff. You and I talk about how we both loathe that in relationships. I want to go deeper. You can't go deeper unless you start cutting, and you don't cut until you're vulnerable.
Oh man, it just makes me laugh when I get around people. My husband has a work friend who had come over to the house, and Mr. Enrique is his name. And Enrique was just listening to me talk to somebody else. And something piqued his interest. He was like, "What you doing over there?" And we brought him into the conversation, and like almost like jaw on the floor, just listening as I talked so openly and so vulnerable and so just putting it out on the table. And he's like, "How do you do that?" And I'm like, "I just do."
It scares people. They don't know how to handle when you're willing to go in conversation anywhere, and within the boundaries of decency, of course. But like it's amazing. People think that there are certain things you're just not allowed to talk about, and I'm going, but why? Yes, there are a few things you should never talk about, but like most of the things of life, like talk about them. That's life. Like how do you process life if you're not going through this process of opening yourself up and being vulnerable, being willing to possibly be judged by what you're going to say? How do you go there?
Yeah, well, continuing on the story with Enrique, a couple days later, like after the hangover period, that's what I like to refer to, the hangover after somebody talks to me, where it's like sinking in, like, wow, she really said that. Like she said that. Sorry, by the way, I assume that people listen to the podcast also have that hangover feeling. They're just like, wow, that was a lot to take in. And a lot to process. Well, a couple days later, he reached out to my husband. He's like, "What does your wife do? What does she do? What is her job?" Because I'm a little confused. And my husband, and then he eventually asked, "Can I talk to her? I want to talk to her. I want more. I want more of that." And he's like, "I just want to respect, that's your wife." And my husband's like, "Be careful what you ask for. Be careful." Because Brittany is 100% vulnerable. I will tell you everything that ever happened in my life. I have zero things to hide. I'll tell you my mistakes. I'll tell you where I've messed up and I've learned and I've grown. I have zero shame about the things that I've done in my life. I don't feel shameful for them because they were lessons. They were things that I could learn from. And if I do make a mistake and I do feel bad about something, I might shame myself for a minute. And then I'm like, you know what? Let me learn from this. Let me grow from this. And that's that process of becoming vulnerable. Start here. Start with yourself and start with being vulnerable with you versus other people. That's harder, trying to be vulnerable with another human being that not necessarily that you trust. If you don't trust yourself and you were taught this pattern of not trusting yourself, and you can't be vulnerable with you, then you're not going to be able to do that with anybody else. So start here and ask yourself those hard questions. We talk about them a lot here. Why do I believe this? Why am I here? Why do I feel like I can't grow? Why do I feel all of these things? Start asking those questions and going that one step deeper. Just be vulnerable with you.
What do you think the major hang up is? Is it that fear of hurt, or are there other things going on?
Yeah, patterns and things that have happened in our past that have taught us when we're born, we are vulnerable. We're the most vulnerable that we can ever be.
Yeah.
And when we're hurt at our most vulnerable time, things happen in our brain. It's why I parent the way that I do. I'm not perfect by any means, but I honor the sheer vulnerability that my children have right now at such a young, impressionable age. I do my best to not berate them or belittle them because whatever voice I speak to them becomes their inner voice. And so now we have hundreds of millions of hurt people bringing all of that, having more babies and pushing it on. And it's just this cycle over and over and over again because nobody's willing to be where you and I are and accept crap. I got some bad things. I need to take hold of this. It's my responsibility to take hold of this. I have to be vulnerable with myself, grow from this, and then pass on better habits to my kids and then to their kids and on and on and on. This generational curse that we have going on of everybody being anxious and depressed and upset, I believe it's breakable, but we have to be vulnerable to get through that.
I think you're onto something, like that hard wiring that happens when you have a learned behavior. For you, when you were trying to be vulnerable and the adults in your life that were supposed to be the responsible ones just let you down over and over and over. And yeah. I learned you don't be vulnerable. You're a wuss. You're a man up already. what are you, gay? Like, I had everything thrown at me from my abuser saying those kinds of things to me. And quite frankly, Brittany, it made me put up the walls, like happened with you before Wildman. And it took many more years for me to break down those kind of walls. And even still, I see them susceptible of coming back up. I'm like, I done tore you down once. I ain't going to tear you down again. Get away. And it's so hard to overcome that unless you're deliberate.
Yeah. Being vulnerable allows you to see other people's reactions as what they are. They come from a place of hurt.
Yes.
So I have a lot of family members in my life that have been hurt and refuse to acknowledge that they have childhood trauma, or trauma from losing a relationship, or trauma from a job turning them down. They refuse to acknowledge, oh, that's just life. That's just how it is. They refuse to acknowledge that there's hurt and there's pain there, and they pass that on and pass it on and push it off and push it off. And they refuse to be vulnerable with themselves and honor that they got some emotions about this. And because I'm so open with myself, it doesn't excuse their behavior.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a difference in excusing someone's behavior and understanding the reason why they are the way they are. Because I'm so vulnerable with myself and I've been this way and I've been open to learning, I can view the situation through their lens and see why they are where they are.
Yes.
And that helps me.
Well, and it's a compassionate, kind of response. But until you do that vulnerable work yourself, you don't see it, which is why they don't see the value of vulnerability. They see the value of their walls. As long as the walls are up, I'm protected. But when you bring those walls down and you feel the feels, as you like to say, and get through the hurt part, the other side of that is kind of like when we kind of transition to keto flu, and it's hurts those first couple of weeks, and then you're finally like, all right, I get I see what you're doing here, body. It's the same mentally. Like, if we could have that keto flu kind of getting over all of the walls that we've had put up trying to protect us, we'd find that we actually are more protected being vulnerable and get stronger.
Yes. Yeah, Brene puts it so much better than I can, but she tells it like, we think that by not being vulnerable, we're helping ourselves to not feel fear and shame, or we're not feeling all these things. Like I said earlier, when you close off vulnerability, you think you're closing off all the hurt, but you're actually closing off all the good things as well.
Yes.
If I wasn't vulnerable as a mom, I wouldn't be able to feel all of the good things that come along with parenting. I wouldn't be able to appreciate those because I was shutting off any feelings that I had. You can't selectively numb. Like, we think we can do this. We pick up alcohol and we think, well, I had a hard day, let me drink this alcohol. I'm not against alcohol, guys. This is just an example. Or we pick up whatever bad habit it is that we have, or a food or cigarettes or alcohol or whatever it is, whatever you go to, over exercising, whatever it is. We pick this thing up and we're like, I'm just going to do this because I'm going to numb my feelings. You can't selectively numb what you're feeling. You're numbing everything. And so that's why people who get addicted to this feeling, because they're trying to shut off all of these things, but then they feel nothing. They feel no happiness. They feel no joy. And so because you're shutting off vulnerability to shut off the fear and pain, you're only opening yourself to feeling nothing, which makes you want to less be more vulnerable. And it just becomes the cycle of, you're just stuck of feeling nothing because you don't want to feel vulnerable. But if you would open yourself up to be vulnerable, as much as you open yourself up to be vulnerable, you open yourself up to feel happiness and joy and all of the good things in life. But you have to be willing to let both feelings in. When you're dating somebody, you go into it willing to show up, be seen, with absolutely no guarantee. That's the definition of vulnerable. You go in, you sit down, you're at the table, hey, how are you? How are you? But you're not going to get anywhere in this conversation if you're not willing to be vulnerable. And there's a chance that nothing will work out. There's a chance that this relationship will go nowhere. But unless you're vulnerable and open yourself up to have that conversation, you definitely will never go anywhere. If you just sit there and talk about the weather, it's not going to happen. A job interview, when you sit down to a job interview and they're asking you questions about yourself, what do they all ask? What's your weakness? What is your weakness? And mine is perfectionism. But
I'm too
that is
perfect.
a weakness. Yeah. Well, I'll talk about that one in just as I just bring back to that one in a second. But they always ask you what your weakness is, and unless you're willing to be vulnerable and open it up, and you just give some bullshit answer, they're not interested in you, because you have to be vulnerable there in that job interview as well. I had a job interview, my first one. Oh man, I am afraid. I believe this is why I got the job. This is why it's important. I am afraid of alligators. I can't even look at pictures of alligators. I freak out. When I go to the zoo, I have to walk, like, freak out. So I'm in this interview. I've got 4 beautiful women around me, and they're interviewing me all at the same time, like a table. I was 17 or 18 at the time, 17. And they're interviewing me, and I'm talking, I'm doing good, I feel good, and out the corner of my eye, I see a picture of Stumpy, who is in South Carolina at the nuclear plant here in South Carolina. He's like the mascot. Well, Stumpy is an alligator. And I just freeze. I just stop what I'm doing. I stop in the middle of a sentence and freeze. And they're like, what's going on? And I was like, I really don't want to tell you guys, but like, can somebody cover that picture over there? I was 100, all of my walls were down. I was completely vulnerable in that time and just honest that, listen, I have an irrational fear of alligators. I can't even see pictures of them. And they, of course, all start laughing, and they saw the human me. They saw the real me, not this polished and poised person. And here I was, just completely vulnerable in that time. Yes.
You were of a job interview I had. It was the first managerial job. It was at a Christian bookstore in Virginia. And they asked, what's your biggest weakness, or what are you scared of the most about this job? I said, having to fire people. What's the first thing they had me do? Fire people. I'm like, you turd balls. Because I was immediately persona non gratis with all the rest of the employees. And yeah, that wasn't fun. Nothing like getting me started with my biggest fear.
Yeah, face your fears. Just jump right in.
And this is what I thought about their fears. And I was a scapegoat to fire the people they wanted fired. So, but yeah, when we were talking about the walls earlier, one of the things that does is it keeps that negativity, it keeps that everything that you're loathing about your life in. And when you're vulnerable and you let that out, I mean, that's how you get rid of it. I hate to keep making nutrition analogies, but that's how my brain thinks. It's kind of like autophagy when you go on a fast and you're getting rid of those dead proteins that just kind of hang out in the body, no way to get rid of them. Being vulnerable is the autophagy of your emotional health. You're going to clean up so much stuff that is just sitting in there, going nowhere, doing you no good. If you don't take action, like have a fast by releasing it, being vulnerable, you can't clean that stuff up, and it's just going to eat you alive. And we have people in our lives right now, you and I both, that they've let it eat them alive their whole lives.
Yeah, that was beautiful explanation. If you guys are listening, you don't know what autophagy is, look that up real quick. That was a beautiful analogy of exactly being vulnerable. You're opening that up. You're opening all of those doors to clean out all of that old stuff. And I'm telling you, when you become vulnerable and you start to look at all of those little things in your life, the little habits and the little things, the little reactions that you have, and you realize, oh crap, what do we all say, like when we get older, we become parents? Oh God, I just sounded like my mama. Do you know why you sounded like your mom? Because it's planted in your brain. It's become something that's played over and over in your brain, and you're just reiterating in what they said to you because they're your inner voice. What happens to you is your inner voice. And so sometimes that inner voice is not all the way what it should be. And you have to captivate that and be vulnerable of, okay, I love my mom. Perhaps you have a close relationship with her. I'm just speaking here. I love my mom, but this was probably not the best thing to say. What can I say instead? What can I do instead? How can I be vulnerable to both love my mom with all of my heart, but understand she didn't know best? And how can I be better? How can I do better? How can I take this and be better? And sometimes the parents in that situation, your parents, get really offended by that. And there's really not, it's not a place to be offended. It's just data. It's just information of thank you for what you did for me. And I want to do better. I hope my children do better than me. I hope they take everything that I teach them and that I push them to be. I hope they take that and be better than me. I can't wait for my kids to grow up and be better than me.
Well, here's the thing. Like with your kids, I talk to you enough to know, and I hear you interacting with your kids in the background when we're talking. Like, it's nothing like what you've described how you grew up. Like, you're giving them the rope to be themselves. You would have died to have had the rope to have been yourself. And although, you know, some of the wild stuff that maybe you did need to get reeled in, just kidding. We all had our streaks, and yours will too, especially as in our teenage years. But still, like, it's cool. I think they will look back, and I wonder how much a mama's inner voice will become a part of their psyche. Or did you instill in them enough that they could be vulnerable with you now, that vulnerability becomes their inner voice?
Yes. So this just, my kids, I can talk about my kids all day, so I'll try to keep
stop.
this.
Go on.
I love my children. So today, yesterday was a sick day. They weren't feeling good, and we unschool. And so I'm not like you must learn even if you're sick, you know. And so I just let the day be what it was. If you want to open a book, you can open a book. If you're not feeling good, just lay down. And both of my children who are of that learning age, 8 and 6, I didn't say anything to them. I didn't push learning. I didn't even mention anything at all. Both of them, by the end of the day, had turned on YouTube independently, had turned on YouTube and had started learning things. And then today, my oldest had woken up, and I've taught her to be vulnerable and open and learn. And I've taught them how to learn, not what to learn. And so she wakes up today and she's so excited. She's like, Mom, I found this video last night. She's like, I was kind of tired. I didn't feel good, but I found this video last night and it was teaching me how to draw. And she's been drawing all morning long. Beautiful pictures that she had taught herself how to do. And like, that's it. That inner voice of teaching her how to learn and how to be vulnerable and how to have feelings and how to do all these things. I'm like, it's working. It's working. It feels so good to be this vulnerable and this open with my kids, because I don't hide anything from them. If you're old enough to ask the question, you're old enough to know the answer. So I'm completely open with them. Poor Jimmy. I'm so open with Jimmy. I had nothing.
Well, it's open with you. So I think and that gets to my next point I wanted to make is, I think sometimes people want to be vulnerable, but they don't think they have permission to be vulnerable. You and I, we have an unspoken permission. We go there. And I think once you go there, the floodgates open up and it's like, oh, thank God you want to talk too and be real too. And so I think that's what, especially in love relationships, you don't want to like look bad or weak, but then like you said, that's the secret to going deeper, to get to know that person. That's what happened with you and Wildman. You got so deep, so fast in the conversation and in your vulnerability with one another that you were drawn to each other. And even in that oops, I'm going to put oops in quotations, even in that oops, I love you, yeah. He felt it as well. And that was another vulnerability. It just came out of you because that's how you really felt. He needed to hear that. And he's like, well, yeah, I love you too. Like it was just, ding, ding, you know, and the vulnerability just opened up this beautiful relationship that now is still thriving over a decade later. So, but that's the thing, when you get into these conversations with people, maybe you do a light vulnerability exposure, you're not real, like, what about, and you just kind of back away and go, all right, what do you think about that? And then they're like, oh, yeah. And then you're like, okay. And then they reciprocate. It's that reciprocation you're waiting on.
Yeah. So you got to dip your toe in a little bit. I know how I can come across. I know how deep that I go. Just an average conversation with me goes deep. And if I label the conversation as deep, it's like 10 levels past where a normal person would go. So I recognize that about myself. But like, I just kind of dip my toe in a little bit. Like, I'll say a little something and I'll just watch the reaction. I just observe. And if they're not open to it, cool. I know this is not my people right now. They're not open to this. That's okay. That's not a problem. They're just not willing to go where I am, and that's all right. I think when I did that with you, you were like, well, this is new. I don't never met anybody like this before.
Yeah, you're the only one that's ever been as vulnerable as you are with me, and vice versa. I don't open up myself to anybody quite like I do to you, but we built that trust, and so now it's easy. Like, we have easy, hard conversations.
Yes. All of those hot topics are easy to talk about. Like, people get so fired up because they view it as their identity, but when you're vulnerable and you're open to learn new things, you can go into those really hard conversations, just an open book. Tell me how you feel. Tell me how you become a therapist almost, Ellie. I tell people I therapy people. I do, because I want to know. Like, one of my favorite things to do as a teenager, I know I was crazy weird. I would love to sit down with my grandparents and just listen. Just listen. Just tell me about your life. Tell me what you learned. Tell me about all the hard things that you went through. Tell me about your childhood. Tell me about your parents. What about your job, your first interview? Like, tell me all of it. I just want to soak all of it up. Tell me all of it. I live for that stuff.
And that explains a lot. Because most kids don't. Most teenagers, especially this day and age, they just throw away older people, and it's like there's such wisdom there.
Yeah.
In the older cultures, like and other parts of the world, they always revered their older generation and learning from them, hearing where they were vulnerable about things, and it's like it just opens your mind to a new world. Otherwise, we're just destined to repeat the mistakes of the past. And it's like we can all be that much better, but we have to all be willing to go there in these conversations and being vulnerable.
I have noticed a pattern. I'm not saying that this is everybody, but I have noticed a pattern in the older generation that they're kind of stuck in their ways and not willing to learn anything else. And so when I go into these conversations now a little bit differently than I did as a kid, I'm still open and I still want to listen. I still want to learn. But when I hear like those red flags of things that were taught differently 50 and 60 years ago versus what we know now, times have definitely changed in the last 50 to 60 years. I hear where they came from and why they believe the way they believe. And then again, so that we're not repeating this same negative process, I learn from it. I take the information and I try to learn from it. So I had a grandfather who lived not just during segregation times, like he was the 1 out of 10 white students put into the black school, and they did the same way the other way. He was one of those people, and listening to his story and his experience, and I think that's why, you know, I don't want to go too deep into it, but that's why I get so passionate about talking about the racial issues that we have, because my family experienced firsthand what that was like. They lived it. And I listened to my grandfather, and we didn't have any inkling of racism in my family, and so I didn't experience what that looked like until I met some other people in my life whose family was very much that way, and then I had to be vulnerable to the idea that shit, I was one of those people that said it wasn't real because I didn't experience it. I didn't see it. And my family had lived it like during the times. And my grandfather had gone out of his way to make sure and understand. He was poor. He was raised really poor. And so he understood all of those struggles, and that was passed down. And so I just was born into a family that understood that. And when I realized, crap, I'm wrong, I had to be vulnerable and do the work to unlearn that and to unlearn that thought that I had planted in my head. Wow, that took a big turn there real quick. But it's just to show you that listening to other people, opening your eyes to other people's experiences, other people's thoughts, other people's beliefs, other people where they are. Meet them where they are and just listen and open yourself up to learning. It's beautiful.
You know what vulnerability does too is it humbles you to see the world through other people's eyes. So what you were just saying about you didn't believe racism existed until you saw it up close and personal, and you're like, oh my gosh. And it was at that point you could have lashed out, you could have done many things, but you had compassion, even though you were shocked. You had compassion. You were like, oh my gosh, my whole worldview has been built around this not existing. Now I see it does. It becomes this humble experience for you that if you're not willing to be open-minded enough to want to change and be willing to go, hey, I have had a belief system that's far different from that. Let me learn why you're that way, and you learn why I'm my way, and you come to this kind of consensus. It's kind of a lost art in this day and age, and vulnerability is the key. All of the division, like in our country right now and with amongst people, is because they're so unwilling to want to learn from each other and each other's experiences and be vulnerable with one another. We have so much more in common than we do dividing us, and yet people just want to have their camps and butt heads all day long.
Yeah, I find it really hard to be who I am sometimes, because going back to that, like, I just crave to talk to people. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little teary. I have positioned myself because as a child, I grew up in a small town. I saw white people and I saw black people. That's it. That's all I knew. All I knew was what I'd ever been told. And all I let myself see was what I had been told. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. I didn't do anything wrong. I just was reiterating the things that were told to me. And somewhere along the way, I'm like, this is not okay. And so now I've positioned myself and my family, and also a small town. I knew like one gay person, and everybody hated them. Like they thought they were the most horrible person ever. And now that I'm older, I have a sign in my house, and I want a huge one. I want a big one, like in the front of my yard. Everybody is welcome here. And that, like, I feel that so deep. I want to know any race, any gender, any identification. I want to talk to you. I want to learn from you. I'm not going into it like hating on you or believing any certain thing about you. Like, I just want to learn. I've been so vulnerable with myself and in learning myself. Like, I want to learn other people. I love to learn people. I have an amazing friend, and he's just one of those that fits the mold like you and I. Like, it doesn't make sense. I'm 28. I'm a white female, and he is freshly 18, and he's black and gay in the South. And like, I love him. I have learned so much from him just sitting and listening. Just tell me your experiences. Let me hear your experiences. Let me learn from that. And him being so vulnerable with me has helped me learn.
But you've built that trust with him, and your sister is the same age as him, and so you kind of have an in that way, but an in that was built on your sister's trust in you, and then she's like to him, yeah, he's cool, she's cool, and then you guys connect, and then you can swing older and younger. That you're so unique at 28. You can swing and talk with an old guy like me, and then you can swing down and do the vernacular with an 18-year-old. It's amazing. But it's because of your vulnerability. You go there, and there's an attraction that comes from somebody who's vulnerable. What may seem perceived as weakness at first, you quickly realize they're the one person everybody goes back to when things go awry. That's you.
Yeah, you're right. I have positioned myself where I'm just thinking of all the different people that are in my life. There's no pattern. There's no rhyme. There's no reason. I just find these people.
Yeah, there is. Everybody that comes to you is hurt in some way.
Oh, yeah. I do attract those people. I do.
Yeah.
But I love those people. Like, I just want to hug them and hold them. And even the people that I struggle with in my relationships, like even the people that there's contention and there seems like hostility and hate, like in my heart, I just want to hug them. Like, just let me hug you. Just let me love you. I know you're lashing at me because of what happened to you. I know there's some disconnect here, and I just want to fix it. Like, just let me help you make it better. Be vulnerable with me so I can help you. But it doesn't work that way.
No.
But I lay myself out there, and I'm vulnerable, and I'm always that way. I really am. Even if the people who have hurt me over and over and over again decided one day that they wanted to be vulnerable with me and ask for forgiveness and like, let's work on this, I would do it. I know this.
Well, and that's the beauty of vulnerability. There is no closed door to it. Vulnerability is literally perpetually waiting open door. And when you're ready to be vulnerable back, magic happens.
Yes. And also, I just want to give an invite, because I say this a lot on my personal page. I put it down at the bottom of my post. I say it in my stories. And I hope you hear me when I'm saying this out loud. If you need to tell the story, you have something to share, excited, sad, whatever it is, you just feel like, all right, I want to be vulnerable with somebody, and I feel like I can be vulnerable with her, but I don't want to bother her. Bother me. Reach to my DMs. If you need to.
And she's serious, guys. Like, I know Brittany probably better than anybody but Wildman. She's serious. She really wants to. And I'm open to it as well. I'm a little more pissy than you are, but we both are open to that and hearing people. And you know, with the position I have and the notoriety I have, I get a lot of that unsolicited. And it's such a humbling experience when you hear from people like that. But yeah, definitely take up Brittany on her offer, becoming Brittany Lee over on Instagram. The DMs are always open. I know she'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have built so many, what I view as close relationships through doing this. Sam and April are a sweet couple that live in Virginia, and I met them the same way. We just started talking one day. We just started talking, and they shared their story, and Chris and I shared our story, and then we drove up to their house for Thanksgiving a couple years back, and then they came to see us, and then we're going back to see them. They drove 7 hours to come see me in the hospital. Like, we just made this beautiful friendship out of vulnerability.
Yeah, and they're wonderful friends of mine as well. So it's kind of cool. Like, when like-minded people, we find each other. The people that are vulnerable, you see a vulnerable person a mile away. It's cool.
Oh, yes. Yes, absolutely. You can see it. You can sense the people that are closed off and aren't ready to change and aren't willing yet to change. I don't like putting like, oh, they're not willing to change ever. I don't like putting that on people. I really don't, even if it's true.
You know what's fun is when I'm talking to somebody and I know they're close, because you can hear them kind of hint at it, and then they back off and hint at it and back off, and it's like, okay. And I've got a couple of people like that in my life right now, and it's like, I'd be vulnerable with them just to kind of give them permission. Okay, it's okay. On in. They're dipping and they're coming back. They're not really going all the way yet, but I think the more you build that trust with somebody, the easier that process becomes.
Yes, I'm just smiling ear to ear because I love talking about this topic, and I love meeting new people in all walks of life. I really do. I love doing that. I think that's why I am where I am right now, doing what I do, because I love people. I love hurting people and broken people and sad people and happy people and whatever color your skin is or whatever your gender is. I truly just love people.
And that's another point too. People think vulnerability is only when all else has been exhausted and your life's falling apart, and that's the time to be vulnerable. Literally anybody can be vulnerable. Like, literally everybody, even the most, think about the most put together person you know in your life, whoever that is, who's seemingly the best human you know, even they have an openness, or should have an openness to vulnerability, because something in their life, and usually those people that you think are perfect have gone through hell and back and lived to tell about it. And so they want to be vulnerable because, quite frankly, if they've gotten to that point, they have been vulnerable already.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, this is bold to say, but if you really think about any successful person on the planet, they all had to walk through vulnerability to get to where they are. You know,
Yes.
someone would dare to say that Jimmy Moore had to be really freaking vulnerable when it came to talking about a diet that nobody else was doing as a weight loss thing at the time. Like, that was bold, you know, to be that and to be vulnerable and to talk about that and to be vulnerable and talk about your weight loss journey and to be vulnerable. Like, I crave that. But anyway, what I was saying is, you think about all these big successful people. I think about David Goggins and where he is. He was 100% vulnerable with himself and pushed himself to the very end of everything that he had. Almost died being so vulnerable and open that I'm not the best I can be. I'm going to keep going. He had to be, you know. Tony Robbins, he tells his story and he tells, you know, being open and vulnerable about this. That's the only way he is where he is. All of these people that I look up to so much, success only comes through being vulnerable with your story and where you are and being vulnerable with other people.
Yes. It's such a key element that people just don't even think about. And with my story, for example, I've had to continue to be that way, even though I don't look the part.
Yeah.
And so that's made it also, I'm open about it. I'm like, hey, I still have struggles. I still have weight. I still do this. I still that. And so that's a vulnerability that you don't hear from like weight loss gurus. And I don't pretend to be one, but it's just funny because people put you in that box and it's like, all right, you want to call me fat? Yeah, I sure am. I've gone on camera, lifted my shirt and said, yep, sure am. And so it's like, I don't hide from it.
That's a level of vulnerable that many people don't know how to take or to accept.
Yeah, this really is the key. I hope people are hearing us loud and clear. And some people might be thinking at this point in the conversation, we've kind of like hyped up vulnerability, but we really haven't said how you take the plunge. What would you say is a good way to kind of go there, at least to start the ball rolling? Number one, you got to find someone else willing to be vulnerable, and that's very difficult because you don't want to fall into the trap of, well, if I'm vulnerable and somebody else is not, it's going to look bad on me or feel bad. Don't worry about that, is what I would say. You be vulnerable, and maybe your boldness will embolden them to open up.
Yeah, so earlier on, I was saying, start with yourself. Start with you. And, like, I'm going to give, like, you're going to think I'm crazy, but I'm so damn serious. Take off all your clothes, all of them. Find a long mirror. Thank you. A full-length mirror. Okay. A full-length mirror in your house. Yeah, please do this in your house. Don't do this in public. Take off all your clothes. Yes. Stare at yourself in the mirror. Look at yourself in the mirror. Up, down, all around. Look at yourself in your true form and tell yourself, I love you. I love you. I love everything about you. That is vulnerability. Telling yourself in your raw form like that, which is something that we're told not to do, by the way. It's completely opposite what we're told to do. To tell yourself that you love yourself and be vulnerable right there with you is beautiful. I think it's so, and I do this. I wouldn't tell you to do something that I don't do myself. And start there, and then start asking those questions, those hard questions to yourself. Why do I believe this about myself? Why am I here? Why do I think I can't change? Why? And just start asking all those questions and just be open and vulnerable with you. And you might get mad at yourself, and that's okay too. Just allow all of those, feel all of the feels. And then as you start to be more vulnerable with yourself and you grow in yourself and you're on this personal development journey, the other conversations just come naturally. You're not out looking for somebody to be vulnerable. I didn't look for Jimmy. Like the universe or God or whoever you believe in or whatever you believe in, it just brought it together. Same thing with my husband. I was not looking for a boyfriend. I was not looking for a husband. I was not. I was absolutely not looking for that. But I started asking myself those hard questions, and poof, there he came. I am definitely a believer that the people will come if you deal with you, if you deal with yourself and the vulnerability with yourself.
Yes, and that attraction thing.
Yeah.
I think when you were 18 and Wild Man came in your life, his vulnerability made him attractive to you. And then over time, you know what? I'm going to credit Wild Man that you're so vulnerable. Like,
Yes.
he's the first one that really opened that door for you. But look what it did. It had this ripple effect, and all these people in your life that you've talked to, they have some level of openness and vulnerability themselves today because you were inspired by Wild Man. Wild Man, we love you, man. I'm glad you inspired someone to open up, because you opening up has helped so many people, myself included, to want to open up and be more vulnerable. And that's the thing about vulnerability too. Once it starts, it's contagious, and everybody wants it because you see the value in it. When you get past the moniker of, oh, you're weak, oh, you can't say certain things to each other, when all that goes by the wayside and you see the good stuff, that's the pay dirt.
My husband and I have always been the questioners in life. We've always been the pushback kind of people. And so when people are like, oh, you can't cry, you're a man. Why not? Why not? Chris cried his eyes out at our wedding. He don't feel ashamed of that. He's proud of that. Yes, that's my wife. Look at that walking towards me.
I can't believe I convinced her. Oh my God. You got bold. Oh my gosh.
Yes, but he's pushed back on all those notions, the idea that a dad has to be a hard ass and be so tough on you and hard. No, he will love on his girls just like he's a big teddy bear, and he's nurturing and caring, and he doesn't like, oh, when you get home and you're a man, you worked all day. No, I ain't doing the dishes. It's a woman's job. He'll do the dishes. He breaks all of those rules.
He has pulled out an old dishwasher and put in a new one after a 12-hour shift at work. He did a 5 or 6 hour job to do that one night when he came home from work. It's like, okay, yeah, he's setting a very high bar for husbandry. So.
Yes. But he's willing to break all of those rules and be vulnerable and tell the world, no, I'm not following your rules. I got my own. I'll be all right. I got this. You worry about you. I worry about me.
Yes. Woo! I am so glad we did this. I'm glad we bumped it up in the schedule because we needed to talk about vulnerability. But I think life circumstances over the past couple of weeks for both of us have just made this topic all the more prescient. And guys, it really is the key to going one step deeper. So I'm really glad we talked about the power of vulnerability here today in episode 18. One Step Deeper Podcast is the name of the podcast. OneStepDeeperPodcast.com is the website. Go check us out over on Instagram, One Step Deeper Podcast, over on Facebook, the One Step Deeper Podcast community. And all of these places I'm mentioning, by the way, we also put the video for you to watch, even up on Instagram, even up on YouTube. It's at Facebook. It's everywhere. We want accessibility. And of course, you can listen on the podcast in the traditional formats, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Alexa, all of the usual ways to do that. And it does premiere on Sundays at 4 p.m. Eastern Time over on YouTube. Just type in a keyword, One Step Deeper, you'll find it. And man, we have some good stuff coming up. And yeah, we bumped a few things down the line to get this one in this week. But coming up, guys, if you think you've heard One Step Deeper, you ain't heard nothing yet. We've got so many good topics coming up that I cannot wait to get to. But Brittany, thank you so much. This was fun. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, see ya.
OneStepDeeperPodcast.com.